Okay, so welcome as ever to Volker Igb meeting. I hope everyone's well and that we'll have a productive and informative meeting. Got a bit of a throat today, so hopefully my voice will continue. I'm chairing today on behalf of Michelle, who's not able to do so. As ever, I'm going to plan to put in a short break around 11 o'clock. We'll just kind of work it in terms of when an agenda item finishes, just to let everyone stretch their legs and get a coffee. So without further ado, can I take the apologies? Tonya, I believe we've got Michelle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Michelle McClurg. I also have Stephen McAllister and Kathy Cowan, Angela Wallace.
So we've got Angela here after all.
Sorry, I beg your pardon, I just read it. No,
Thank you.
cross it out again.
Is anyone aware of any other apologies? No. Okay. In that case, we'll have any declarations of interest. None. Okay. In that case, moving swiftly along to the minute, I think as usual, what we'd intend to do is just if anyone has any corrections on the minute, if they can raise their hand or wave at me. If not, are we happy to approve the minute? Nodding head. Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay. Just moving all my papers apart. We now have the action log, and Patricia, I don't know if there's anything specific from the action log. Aware that was one item that will be carried forward to the next meeting.
Yes, that's correct. We've got an update on the intermediate care facility on the agenda. There are ongoing discussions with the Chief Executive of the Health Board in relation to the transfer of the management of Igb functions. The board had asked previously for a report on the readmissions rate, and we're proposing to bring that to the next meeting of the Igb. There's been quite a lot of work done on that, but with the recent pressures, we really need to understand historical issues and actually if there are new emerging issues. So we'll bring that to the next meeting. And in relation to the home support and supported living contract, that's also on the agenda today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I think that makes sense. I know that everyone's under a lot of pressure just now, and I think the content of the papers very much tell that story. And I think that having that report for the next meeting and be able to explore that in more detail. I'm aware that there's been quite a lot of work done on it, but I look forward to seeing that at the next meeting. Does anyone have any questions or anything from the action log that they would like to raise? Or are we okay just to move on to the Chief Officer's report? With that, I'll ask Patricia again.
Thank you. So yes, just to highlight to members of the board that we've had another period of sustained and increasing demand across the whole health and care system. The hospital has seen increase in complexity and acuity in the number of people attending, but also the number of admissions, and one of the largest pressure has been non-COVID pressures. People are increasingly complex and requiring a longer length of stay. We've also seen unprecedented demand from the community, and some of the detail of that is covered within the performance report. So members of the board will have an opportunity to scrutinise some of that data later on in the agenda, but I just wanted to give you that backdrop. So the Chief Officer report includes a number of updates, members of the board on the vaccination program at 4.13, and again this has been a rolling and responsive programme. At the moment it's the COVID boosters and the flu vaccination, and the details of that programme for all ages are there for your information. We've given you an update on the care home reviews at 4.9. The work that we've done with Angela's support, Pan Forth Valley, in terms of care home assurance has been exemplar. It's informed the national model, and we're continuing to sustain that level of scrutiny against a backdrop of rolling challenges where we've maybe got across Forth Valley 2 to 4 care homes a week that are closed to admissions because of resident or staff outbreaks. These are small in number, but we've seen increasingly, at the time of writing this report it was slightly different, but for example this week we have had 16 care homes that have either got positive staff or residents, so we're having to really closely monitor that, and I think it's reflective of the community level of COVID that we're experiencing across Forth Valley and in Volker in particular. There's also an update on the Gold Command structure, which the Chief Executive in NHS Forth Valley instigated in August, so that we've got initially daily and now twice weekly senior level command and control structures to respond to any emerging issues and to take executive decisions in that regard. Underpinning that is a really effective silver command, which is the engine room across health and care at the moment around some of the challenges with hospital issues, delays in discharge, and also some of the emerging community demand. So that's highlighted at section 5.3. Alongside all of that, we have a number of key strategic elements of our delivery plan, which you'll be aware of, that we provide you some updates on. So there's an update on the Volker Community Hospital Master Plan, which I'm delighted that a number of you have been involved in the series of stakeholder workshops to scope out and inform the strategic needs assessment. So there's an update within the paper on the progress of that, and also highlight to you at section 5.6 some of the challenges around the governance processes that we need to navigate and streamline between decisions the council needs to make in relation to the investment for the intermediate care facility, the capital investment from the health board, and the models of care which sit within, for Falkirk, sit within the integration joint board, but also there will be Pan Forth Valley non-IGB functions delivered there. But hopefully people who've been involved in the process will agree it's been a really participative and collaborative piece of work to date, and we intend to maintain that level of collaboration. But we'll bring back further reports to the board at the early in the new year. We've also been doing some work on the Herbert protocol, which is highlighted in the report, and that's a really helpful process that has been launched nationally with support from the police and the fire service to support carers and people with dementia who maybe go a-wandering. And it's a quick response protocol, summary of the person's appearance, etc., which helps if someone goes missing to mobilise through, it's called the Purple app. Anyone who's registered on that app can help to look out for that individual, and it just gives a quick response. So we've been involved in the launch of that, and we're doing work to support that, linked to a number of our other initiatives. There's also critically been the consultation of the National Care Service, which you were involved in terms of the workshop. With agreement from the Chair and Vice Chair, we submitted the response, which is appended to the report for your perusal. So we've also underway at the moment in the adult support and protection inspection of our services, and that's happening across the 3 local authorities and NHS Forth Valley, although separated for both health and social care partnerships and the separate councils. So we submitted our position statement as required by the 2nd of November, and we'll be going into the file reading and then some of the strategic discussions with the inspectors over the next few weeks. And we'd expect the report to be published in February in the new year. So we'll keep the board posted on that as well. There's section on Igb governance within the report, and we note the resignation of Councillor Alison Black after many years' involvement and contribution to the Integration Joint Board, and we want to acknowledge and thank her for her service to the board. And also our third sector rep, Anya Sanderland, has indicated her resignation, and we will instigate a process for recruiting a new member in place of Anya. And we really valued Anya's contributions to the board, and we wish her all the best in the future. I don't know, Colin, if there's an update in relation to the third local authority member of the board on that process. We didn't have that at the time of writing the report.
Yes, thanks, Patricia. At this stage, there isn't a third nomination, but I anticipate that that situation will change at the next council meeting on the 8th of December. Thank
you, Colin. So I move to the recommendations at section 2. The members of the Integration Joint Board are asked to agree. Sorry, I didn't highlight this element. As we're continuing within the emergency footing for the NHS and continuing to experience significant pressures on our system, we're proposing to continue the delegated authority to myself as Chief Officer in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair to be able to make decisions between meetings and report back to them as we have been doing. And those decisions that have been taken under that delegated authority are cited in the appendix to the report. So the board's asked to agree to continue that delegation of authority to be reviewed again at the next meeting in March 2022. The board's also asked to note the Igb and Health and Social Care Partnership response to the National Care Service consultation. Also to note the vacancy of the Volker Council voting member, and to approve the process to identify a third sector forum representative as detailed in the report. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. As ever, a really a really comprehensive report, and I think probably even how comprehensive it is, it doesn't really do justice to the amount of work that has been ongoing across the team and across the partnership, and indeed across both partners. I think I just want to echo what you say about Alison and Anya, and to thank them for their contribution to the IGB over the years. I'll have a couple of things I'd like to highlight, and then I'd like to open it up. I think just to say very much welcome the national launch of the Herbert protocol. I think that is such an important development, and I know that it was something that the police have tried to do various initiatives as well, but to have a locally and nationally, but to have a national protocol that can support families and support individuals, so that if they do go missing, that there's actually information, and very detailed information, that can help find them as quickly as possible. So I think it's fantastic. And I had one point on the community hospital master plan, and I can't tell you how happy I was to see the idea of a wellness centre and to support self-management. I think that really ties on what the board has been trying to do around the Living Well centres, around the Living Well and Falkirk online tool, and around other work as well. So I think it's that idea sounds absolutely brilliant, and I think that the opportunities there to bring in other organisations to support people with things like a benefits advice. I know that there's been pilots over the years around a welfare rights advice within hospitals and indeed in general practice, and how much that can support individuals' well-being, and also around very practical things like carer support and support around cancer and other diseases and disabilities as well. So I was so pleased to see that. So whomever or whichever group recommended that, big thumbs up for me. So with that, I shall open it up to any questions or comments. Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. And can I echo your comments on wellness? I think that's a great initiative, and hopefully mental health wellbeing will be in there as well, so we can have a kind of holistic service. It sounds great. I just wanted to echo, Patricia, your comments on the care home work. I sit on the care home strategy group for Forth Valley, so see literally on a daily basis what staff of the two partnerships and the health board are doing. It's a great example of joint working, and is making such a difference in a really difficult position, both in terms of the changing COVID position and the amount of guidance that's coming out every week, it seems, from Scottish Government. So the work that staff are doing in both keeping care homes right and also ultimately keeping residents safe, I think is fantastic and really deserves to be commended. The other thing I wanted to say, we're all being very positive this morning, was to commend the NCS response. It's not an easy consultation to respond to, the way it was laid out, and I think that the response really captures the many different views that came up in the consultation event very well. So thank you to everyone who's involved in pulling that together.
Patricia, did you want to come back in there?
Yes, please. I think firstly to just recognise the work that Leslie MacArthur did in pulling all of that response together. It was difficult to try and get the balance and the tone right to reflect those discussions. And thank you for your comments, Gordon. And actually, it's just highlighted that I neglected to highlight to you within the report. We've been tasked by the government to set up a similar oversight group for our community health and care services, and our aspiration is that it should be as high quality and sector leading as our care home work, and that already has given us ample opportunity to look at how poor our data is in terms of the volume and quality of that compared to the well-established health systems that there are around hospital elements of care. So we're working on that really actively at the moment, and we'll update the board on that in future meetings. So apologies, I neglected to highlight that to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Patricia. I'd like to bring in Morven now.
Thank you. I have a question, but before that I wanted to say Patricia had mentioned the work with Falkirk Community Hospital Master Plan, and I wanted to thank her very much for the fact that myself and other representatives have been an integral part of that, very much involved in it, and similarly with the primary care initiative. It's a lot of work, but it's heartening to be part of it, so thank you for that. My question was in relation to point 4.9, the final paragraph, just to ask, Patricia gave us a very full account of what the situation is at the moment in care homes. It says here new visiting guidance is available. What is that guidance at the moment, please?
Thank you. I'll hand over to colleagues who know the ins and outs of that a lot better than I do. I don't know if Gail or Sarah want to come in on that.
Hi, so there is new visiting guidance, which is all about encouraging that move back to a more normal arrangement around visiting. Obviously, in relation to outbreaks and things, that needs to be modified. I can probably share that with colleagues on IJB in more detail, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that would be useful. Thank you, Gail.
We are monitoring the care home's compliance with the national guidance through the TURAS system. So that intelligence is gathered, and we follow up if they're not progressing through the widening out of the visiting. So they have to report. Sometimes they've not updated the information, but there is a process to follow up if care homes are not extending visiting in line with the guidance. And the approach has been to enable more people to visit, and to visit in line with the person's personal needs. It is against a backdrop of, as I said earlier, the challenges around some of the positive COVID staff and patients, but we've moderated with public health and support from Angela and colleagues how we manage those outbreaks, so it isn't a full close down. If we can manage with the stringent infection prevention and control measures and isolation within the care home. But there is a real drive from the government, Morven, that and they constantly monitor it, that we are making sure that people are able to see their relatives. And I see Angela's got her hand up. She might want to come in on that as well. Thanks.
Yes, no, if I may, I just wanted to support everything Patricia said, and colleagues will know from the Chief Officer's report that we meet every week, Andrew and the Chief Officers, myself and Director of Public Health when he can, and the Chief Social Work Officers to have that oversight. So as Patricia said, some of our care homes were reporting that they weren't compliant with the visiting, but actually it was a documentation thing. There was only one care home that needed a bit of support, and actually it's been so difficult, Morven, to get people that confidence of protecting their residents and allowing them to manage the risk of making sure that their loved ones and significant others can visit, and also visiting professionals as well to keep everybody safe. So, and what we've seen is our care homes have been incredible partners in terms of both the care assurance process, the joint work that we've been doing together, and around infection control. So just wanted to give assurance, but we've got the level of detail that in terms of the care homes that we're reporting from the TURAS system, that system that Patricia said, there was only one care home that just needed a bit of support. The rest of them, it was just documentation. So I'm really pleased we've been able to support them, and we've been able to support each care home in their context and their environment, and use public health and a range of other things, as Patricia said. So they've been incredibly responsive. So I hope that level of monitoring we have, Morven, and close beside them that we have gives you that assurance. Hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Morven, have you got any other questions on that? No. Can I just quickly ask, just because Angela's sitting there right in front of me, right in my eye level, I wonder. I suppose there's been similar challenges in terms of visiting hospital, whether that's the community hospitals or the main acute hospital, and I know that guidance has kind of been one of those things that continually changes and evolves as well, and I just wondered if you were able to give a little bit of a picture of what the situation just now is as well. If that would be really helpful.
Absolutely, and I'd be happy to share just with papers just the kind of the most up-to-date guidance. So just as the community curve in COVID happened again, we were having to work really hard to protect any possible transmission or indeed outbreaks, and linking back to where we started in the Chief Officer's report, to have wards closed in Forth Valley at a time when we were really trying to make sure that people who needed care was getting that, where the risk was really high. What we have done, we've complied with the visiting, so the visiting has been slightly restricted, but what we've always done in Forth Valley, and it's the same in the care homes, is that anybody who needs a visitor to get in will have that visitor. Particularly, you know, we do John's campaign, so people who have dementia, who need their loved ones close by, we've always made sure that can happen. We've also made sure that end of life or people who just need their family have ways of safely getting in. So we've managed the guidance. It's slightly more restricted than it was, but in Forth Valley, we, rather than do named visitors, we've opened up just a bit wider so that it's more about a household, because often you've got 3 sisters and 2 brothers, and so what we're trying to do is just to make that much more easy for a family to get round their loved one. But what we do is that we give the senior charge nurses in all of our areas that ability to stay with the guidance, but also understand what people really need and balance the risk of keeping people safe from infection and transference of infection with actually the human needs that we need need our family at a certain time, we do. And end life care, you know, that's been something we've always managed through that. And even if people have been COVID positive, we have managed to get their relatives beside them and really look after them. And also for some families, we have stayed at the last moments of life with families on video and other things so that they could be with us. So we've tried to do it in a very human-centred, patient-focused way. And we've also tried to balance the risks and adhere to the guidelines. So that's a long answer, Fiona, but what we have been trying to do is not stick to the guidance. When we do that, we miss the opportunities for loved ones to do what they need to do and for family members to be where they need to be. So we've tried to do that, and it has caused tension at times because people are saying, well, what and how do we make sure we get parity in that? But what we're trying to do it in a very individual basis while keeping people safe. And we haven't had very many transmissions in our hospital settings, including community hospitals, start managing those risks together. And we won't always get it right, but that's what we're trying to do. And it has been, it might feel a bit fudgy, but we have tried to keep it that flexible and trust in our staff that they can work with the loved ones of the people that are in their care. So I hope that's helpful, and I'm happy to answer any specific questions and share the most up-to-date guidance in our press release, which is quite an easy read in terms of that approach.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela. And yes, I think it would be helpful to share that information. I know that I know that Board will cascade that through the carer centre, for example. So it just means a sort of wider sharing as well around other people who may know that. Yeah. So that's helpful.
And if Morven or any colleagues are. And if Morven or anybody who needs, if they let, we've got really good touch-based systems, in particular around my patient relations team, who do all the drop-offs for families and other things. So if there's anything that we can do for any of these forums, we'd be happy to do that. If anyone just lets us know.
Very much appreciated, Angela. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Does anyone else have any further questions on the Chief Officer report? No. In that case, are we happy to approve the recommendations? Give me some nodding heads if yes. Okay, thank you very much. So I shall move on now to agenda item 6, which is the finance report, and that would be Gillian.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. The finance paper presents the financial results for the first half of the financial year and also considers the likely forecast at year end. I'll draw your attention to section 3 in the report, which sets out the annual budget, which is currently sitting at 247.5 million, which is an increase of 728,000 since the position that was reported at the last IGB meeting. And table 1 sets out the key movements there. As always, I'm still expecting a number of budget changes in the latter half of the financial year. There's a number of outstanding allocations still to come through. So, for example, the Family Health Service contractors, the allocation for that was only received this week, for example. There's been a number of announcements in relation to the Mental Health Recovery and Renewal Fund, and there's still more to come. And I'm sure members will be well aware of the 300 million national funding package that's been issued or announced in relation to winter pressures, which is absolutely huge. There is at least 15 work streams associated with that 300 million that I have been trying to track my way through. A significant amount of it is predicated on recruitment, which does give me some concerns in terms of the timing of that, but also the challenges and the availability of skilled staff across Scotland, given that all integration authorities will be trying to recruit from the same pond at the same time. So there is concerns around some of that, but it is really positive that there has been confirmation that an element of that money will be recurring so we can permanently appoint staff. So that's positive. Another element of the 300 million is a pay award for those social care staff that are working in the independent sector employed by our social care providers. We're working through the implications and the mechanics of that. So that pay award is to be in place with effect from 1st of December. So we have 2 weeks to sort that out effectively, including all the contractual variations that are required on the back of that. But Scottish Government have said that that must be paid by February at the latest. So we're working through that and we will pay it before February. I'm confident of that, but it's just it's slightly more complicated than it first appeared. So The policy intent is for those staff that are working in direct care roles to have a pay increase to £10.02. In order to do that, we will obviously pass the funding and increase the rates to providers, so it might transpire that they have more funding than they actually need to implement that policy, in which case Scottish Government is expecting them to increase the pay of other staff who are working in social care. So there's been a bit of confusion and some queries from providers about how they're supposed to do that. So as I say, we're working through that. And also another positive development is there's been at least 4 million within that 300 around staff health and wellbeing. So that's a really positive development as well, and we're working through proposals for that. So there will be a paper will obviously come back around how that money is being fully utilised. Section 4 in the paper sets out the year-to-date performance. So at September, Table 2 identifies a £398,000 overspend. That is a significant improvement in terms of the year-to-date position that's previously been reported. Vast majority of that improvement relates to the set-aside position. And if members recall, we did say at the last meeting there was a review underway to ensure that any COVID-related costs were fully stripped out of that position and being recorded against COVID funding. So that's made a huge difference there. In terms of savings, a £6 million saving requirement was identified for this financial year, of which about 4.7 related to the integrated budget, and Table 3 sets out the current position. You can see in terms of the achievements to date, it's around 1.3 million. My assessment is about 1.2 million is probably going to be delayed because of COVID. And the Scottish Government have confirmed that additional funding will be made available for savings, but it's been caveated in that integration authorities are expected to obviously make every effort to continue to try to achieve as much as possible before the end of the financial year, which of course we are doing at the moment. But notwithstanding that, as Patricia's already highlighted in the Chief Officer report, there are significant operational pressures that our staff are dealing with at the moment, which is obviously taking them, their priority around that frontline service provision. So we are continuing to monitor that. In terms of COVID costs themselves, the latest return that I submitted to the Scottish Government estimates £9.3 million worth of additional costs, which is an increase of 1.4 million compared to the original forecast. And again, that just reflects the significant pressures that we're continuing to see and expectations of what might come through in that winter period. So the key areas are, of course, PPE. There's going to be an ongoing requirement for that. Financial sustainability support for our external social care providers and independent primary care contractors, although there's been some changes to that. Ongoing infection prevention and control costs, and of course staff absence, and that's been one of the key areas where there's been an increase in costs. Just that number of people who have either been sick through COVID or having to self-isolate just in line with the guidance, and obviously that requires cover, so that's the kind of key movement there. The Scottish Government's expectation is that IJBs should be using COVID reserves in the first instance, which of course we will, and the available balance there is 6.4 million, so we will still require additional funding from the Scottish Government. In terms of the forecast outturn for the year, the current projection is for just over £500,000 of an overspend. However, the expectation is that actually can be managed by the end of the financial year, and I'm therefore forecasting break even. One of the key assumptions around that is that NHS Forth Valley will manage the pressure against the set-aside position, and they've confirmed that that will be the case. So I am confident that a break-even position overall will be reported for the current financial year. In terms of the recommendations then, members are asked to note the year-to-date position, to note the break-even forecast for the year, and to approve the breakdown of the payments under the directions which are provided at Appendix 1. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Gillian. As ever, as you're speaking, you answer any questions that I have without me. Yeah, you must be telepathic or something like that. So I shall open up to any further questions. None? Well, in that case, I'd be happy to. Oops, Gordon.
Convener, I think we've also got Robert wanting to come in as well.
I think Robert had his hand up before I did.
Oh, thanks, Gordon.
Right, Robert.
Yeah, Gillian, it's just around the money to care homes for the extra pay, and you said that some of them may have some extra money which they'll give a pay rise to other staff within their company. Is there any scope for them just to increase the staff complement through that without having to pay the extra staff first?
That certainly wasn't the instruction from the Scottish Government, Robert, but I would have thought that would be quite a reasonable thing to suggest. The letter from the Scottish Government was quite clear that they were to increase the pay of other staff. And I think some of that, Robert, was around allowing these companies to maintain sufficient pay differential. So, for example, you know, they might have a carer on £10.02 an hour now. They were previously on £9.50. They might have a supervisor that was on £10.50. So there was a £1 difference between the roles. That pay award will reduce that £1 difference to 48p. So I think the expectation is they will maintain the differential, and they would just make sure that that was the expectation. But I think it's a good point, one which I'll take back to Scottish Government and ask, given the pressures, you'd think that increasing capacity might be a good idea.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Robert. Gordon.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a really good report, Gillian. I mean, it's such a complex position with so many moving parts still and so many different pressures. To be predicting break even at year end, I think, is really impressive with everything that's going on. It's really welcome that government have confirmed the savings position. That was a big issue last year, and this year at times I think there were indications that may or may not be coming through, so it's great to have that confirmed. My question was around the numbers of people waiting for packages of care, which I think elsewhere in the papers there's an estimate of about 300 people waiting. So I just wondered how that was factored in terms of finances, because obviously if there are all these people waiting for care, that may well mean additional costs, and I'm not entirely sure where that figures in the projections for the remaining 6 months of the year. Thanks.
Yeah, we've built that in. So there's an assumption around additional packages and phasing of that coming in. We know at the moment there's a real challenge because the providers have indicated they've got really limited capacity. We're obviously trying to recruit as well, so it's a timing issue. So that we have made assumptions, as I say, around recruitment in that latter half, but it's a bit of educated guesswork at the moment, but it is built in, Gordon, but it will be more of a pressure, I would suspect, for the 22-23 financial year, just given where we are in the current financial year and the timing about getting people placed and so on. So we'll pick that up in the business case.
Thanks, Gillian. Cecil.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. Just a couple of questions, Gillian. 300 million and the 15 work streams. I mean, we heard about this before. Are there any unintended consequences in those work streams that we should be aware of that might impact elsewhere on the budget? And the other question I had is about the certainty of any gap around the COVID-related funding that we would need. And to ensure that that's not going to be something that will come as a surprise to us when we get to the year end.
Thanks, Cecil. They're really good questions. In terms of the 300 million, yes, there are implications within that. The Scottish Government have helpfully indicated that an element of it will be recurring. So from that point of view, in terms of the recruitment, I'm content that there's assurance that that will be funded going forward. However, as I say, it's predicated a lot on recruitment, so as increasing multidisciplinary teams within health and social care. There's some targets around recruiting 1,000 health care support workers, and there has been recognition that that actually might destabilise our external or commission services if people leave employment through an independent sector to come work for us, and that has been recognised. So we will take that into the mix, and the expectation is that the new community health oversight group that Patricia mentioned, similar to what we have for the care homes, they will take a view on that recruitment position and whether that's going to be an issue. We obviously need to try and look at some innovative ways of using that money to make sure that we do try and protect the position and the staffing, I guess, of our external partners. Your other question in terms of COVID, we have had sufficient assurance from the Scottish Government, Cecil, in that respect, so I'm quite content around that. There was an email that came out, particularly in relation to the savings position, where they said that they wouldn't allocate the savings money at the moment, but they would build it into their projections, but they also gave a guarantee that they would provide funding to ensure that every IGB breaks even. So from that point of view, I was quite surprised to get such open communication from Scottish Government around the position. So I'm content that it's assured.
Right, thank you, Gillian. I like those sort of guarantees. It's always very, very reassuring, isn't it? In that case, do we have any further questions? Definitely not this time. Colin, Tonya, just flag up to me if I've missed anybody in terms of hands up. In that case, are we happy to approve the recommendations? Okay, thank you very much. And we shall move on to the business case, and that is Gillian again.
Thanks. Yep. So the business case sets out the funding requirements in our financial planning assumptions for the 22-23 financial year, in line with our integration scheme requirements. Similar to the position in previous years, I would point out that there's a number of key uncertainties at this stage. So the position is subject to change, and there's already been a couple of movements since the paper was published. But in terms of the high level financial planning assumptions, I'll just take you through them if that's okay. So in terms of funding, the assumption at the moment is that health contributions would be increased by 2%. In terms of the local authority position, the assumption is that any ongoing integration pass-through money, which is funded from the health portfolio and transferred to Scottish Government, will be transferred to local government. Sorry, it will be passed across to the IGB in full, and that's in line with Scottish Government guidance. I would point out that in terms of Falkirk Council's planning assumptions, they are not intending to provide any further contribution to the IGB at this stage, and I suspect that will be a key negotiating point. In terms of the pass-through, just to give you a bit more background in that funding, it doesn't come from the local government settlement, it comes from the health portfolio transferred to local government. They then pass it across to the IGBs, and that's fully committed for specific items, and that includes the Carers Act, implementation of the living wage, and free personal care. So that's already committed when that money comes across. My expectation would have been that Falkirk Council would then provide an uplift in relation to any budgets that aren't funded by that pass-through money, so the core budgets that are out with it. The Council's expecting a 1% increase in their funding level, so my view, it would have been reasonable for a 1% increase to, as I say, those budgets that are not funded through the pass-through. But as I say, that will be a key negotiating point. I've reflected the Falkirk Council planning assumptions at this stage in the business case. It was important that they recognised the figures. In terms of pay, 2% pay rise is assumed at this point. Again, that's obviously subject to negotiations. I've also assumed that funding will be provided in relation to any increases in employers' national insurance contributions. Again, that's subject to further confirmation from Scottish Government. In terms of inflation, I've gone with a prudent estimate of 3.5%, which is a wee bit on the high side. But I was just conscious that we are starting to see a number of emerging supply issues where we have had to source alternative products from other suppliers, which have been slightly more expensive. So I just wanted to build that in. Paying inflation in terms of pharmacy, in terms of the kind of drugs that are prescribed through GP practices and dispensed via community pharmacy, I've estimated at 5.5%, which was in line with the estimate for last year. Contractual uplifts are clearly still subject to negotiation, but 3.6% has been included for social care providers. Nothing has been put in for family health service practitioners at this stage. Ongoing impact of COVID, it's assumed will continue to be funded, and we are in continual discussion with Scottish Government around the recurring impact of the COVID pandemic. National policy developments, we've spoke at length about the 300 million and working that through in terms of the recurring impact of any of the recruitment and other policy. No allowance has been included around the Feely review or outcome of the National Care Service. It's a bit early at this stage, so there's nothing in for that. And similarly, in terms of the primary care improvement plan, the assumption remains that that will be fully funded by the Scottish Government. A new national finance group has finally been set up to inform the future funding requirements for the contract, which is fabulous. And the first meeting of that group is next week, and I'm a member of that group, so that's good. I will skip across then to section 5, which outlines the current projection. So if you can see table 1, the inflationary uplift is currently estimated at £5 million. The estimated pay and various price and product pressures are estimated at £12.5 million, which leaves a significant gap of £7.5 million to be addressed. The breakdown of that by service area is outlined in Table 2 under Section 5.2 of the paper, and you can see the kind of key pressure areas are the ones you'd expect. So social care services, Gordon, that's reflecting an element of the question you asked around the packages and the ongoing impact of that, the ongoing demand. Primary healthcare services in terms of prescribing, and of course the set-aside position. There has been work to continue to refine these figures. So in terms of the gap around the Falkirk Council position, which is outlined in Table 1, there's a double count within there around the living wage of about 700,000. So that reduces the gap. And as I say, there would be ongoing discussions around whether there's any other funding contribution that they would make. But my assessment is that as a result of all of that, the gap is somewhere between £7.5 to £6.5 million, so a significant issue. In terms of efficiency savings, there's a range of initiatives being proposed and worked up and quantified at the moment, and that's set out in Section 6. As it stands at the moment, there's around £3.8 million worth of proposals that's been identified, and the table is pretty colourful there, but the vast majority are red. And there's reasons for that in terms of whether I think they either need approval, so they have to go through a separate process, how realistic it will be of them delivering in year, and also the ongoing impact of COVID and what they might affect. So you can see there's a number of areas within that. There's quite a few savings under added social care which relate to income generation. I guess the kind of charging and income side still, strictly speaking, sits with Falkirk Council rather than the IGB, so there would need to be some discussion and approval for those particular ones as well. In terms of capital, Section 7 just sets out the various programmes that are reflected in the capital plan and assumptions for 22-23. So primary care estate redevelopment is in there, £500,000. Some of that is around minor works to existing premises that has been underway since last year, so that will be the kind of finalisation of some of those refurbs and upgrades. And there's various things within social care in terms of the ongoing estate, 200,000 for social work buildings, the intermediate care feasibility, there's fees and other costs within that, and changing place toilets continues to feature in the capital programme. So in terms of the conclusion then, I would highlight the significant financial gap that's currently forecast against the 22-23 business case. And in terms of recommendations, seek approval from the IGB that this forms the basis of initial negotiations with our partners in terms of the funding contributions. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Gillian. Obviously, there's a lot of information in there that you simply don't know yet, or is you're based on your best planning assumption. So I suppose the probably significant issues around pay costs and inflation, and I know that there's been the initial discussions around with COSLA and what that means for the pay award for social care staff and where that might end up in the end, and
yep.
And obviously inflation is sitting at a higher level just now, but whether that might settle down again, and also whether the pressures around more products, etc., being more expensive is something that's an ongoing pressure, or something that is a point in time, I guess, is a question. I have just one specific question, because I'm aware that even within the business case and suggestions around savings, that this is a point, and that maybe will be quite a different point when we get to the end of it. But the question around employers' national insurance contributions now, we have I believe that will be covering of national insurance contributions around health. I'm wondering whether it is as clear around those staff who are employed by the local authority, whether that's in social care, or I'm going to use the term infrastructure around that, and obviously there's things like housing and care. Some of the staff are not employed, but they're employed in housing. They're not employed by the partnership, you know, they wouldn't be seen necessarily as social care. So I'm just wondering if do we actually know that it's going to be the case, there's going to be assistance with that or not?
No, it's not clear at the moment, Fiona. My assumption is that staff within health and social care would be covered, but that would then have implications for the council in terms of those staff that you've just mentioned in housing and so on, and whether that will be funded. So it remains to be seen whether that will be the case. I would like to think so, but until you see it in black and white.
Fiona, can I
in there?
Yes, just jump in. The indications from discussions with COSLA is that all Barnett consequentials will be passed on, and Scottish Government will pass on the Barnett consequentials through local authorities, and that includes the employer's national insurance. What it doesn't do is when the consequentials come is split them out into health and to others, but there's an understanding that the national insurance Barnett consequentials will be passed on in full, and that should cover the employer's aspect of it. But we're trying to get something clearer on that because it's not clear at the moment, but that's what government are saying to officials.
Yeah, they're not small amounts of money. But when you say 1.25%, it sounds small, doesn't it? But when you actually start to add it all up, it comes to quite a significant amount. That's really helpful, Cecil. Does anyone else have any further questions on the business case at the moment? No. In that case, are we happy to approve the recommendations? Obviously, we'll see further information as we move forward. And I'm sure if anyone has any specific questions around some of this, that Gillian would be happy to follow up. I'm volunteering you there, Gillian. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Okay, then, is everyone happy to approve the recommendations? Great. In that case, I shall move on to agenda item 8, which is the mobilisation plan, improvement plan, remobilisation plan, and that is Gail and Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I'll introduce this paper, if that's okay. So this follows on from the introduction provided in the Chief Officer's report around the significant pressures that we are seeing in the system at the moment. So what the report does is bring forward an overview of some of the actions that we've been undertaking and are undertaking to help resolve that situation and make sure that we provide safe, effective services to those who are most vulnerable and really need that care. So I'll go through the situation and some of the actions that we're taking. So as has been mentioned, the pressures are significantly increased. The demand for unscheduled care has increased. Our delayed discharges have actually been really high. We've actually improved on that position fairly significantly due to the focused work that we've been undertaking over the last couple of months. Obviously, there's an element of that we're unable to predict and plan for, but we are managing that relatively well. We're at the lowest figure for 3 months at the moment, which is really good. There has been an increase in number of people requiring end-of-life care at home, and that's around a 45% increase from pre-pandemic levels. And there's also been an increase in demand for packages of care, as been mentioned already. So our current waiting list is around 332. I do need to draw to your attention there's an error in terms of last year's figures, should read at 62 rather than 32, but that's still a huge increase from last year, moving from 62 to 332. Staff sickness absence levels are also significantly higher across a range of different staff cohorts now compared to last year, and there'll be a range of reasons for that. The staff have been working exceptionally hard, going above and beyond under really exceptionally difficult circumstances, and that is absolutely taking its toll on our staff. And also it's also affecting our provider organisations, and we're seeing again them struggling with staff sickness absence and staff moving on to different roles and different careers. So as a result of that, there has been some providers having to hand back packages of care. We've had around 41 packages of care handed back since July, which again puts increasing pressure on the system, whereby we have vulnerable people receiving care that they need that care to continue without interruption. So the emerging demand does reflect that extended period of the pandemic and the lockdown. So citizens might have delayed receiving timely care, they might have lost mobility and experienced the impact of pandemic and isolation, particularly in relation to their mental health. So that's what we're seeing and noticing at the moment, both in relation to people needing care and also the staff that are providing that care. So there's a number of actions that we've been undertaking. We have been working very much in a cross-system way. We've been working really closely with our colleagues in the hospital and our colleagues across Stirling and Clackmannanshire to really seek to understand the situation and how we can collaboratively seek to address and improve the situation. So we have been looking at additional bed space. So we've managed to rejig spaces. So we moved the rehabilitation gym at Falkirk Hospital upstairs, which allowed us to reconfigure that unit into a 4-bedded unit. In addition, we were able to reconfigure a lounge area to a single-bedded unit as well, and that's created additional capacity with minimal impact on staffing requirements, recognising how challenged we are in terms of providing that additional staff. We have been increasing intermediate care beds. At the moment, we have 65 intermediate care beds available across the in-house and our providers. We've got 24 in our providers and 41 in our own care homes. What I would say is, obviously, you heard earlier around the changing position around COVID and care homes, and what that does mean, particularly in relation to our intermediate care beds, is when a care home has to close to admissions for COVID and for other safety reasons, that does impact on the flow that we can support across the whole of the system. We are looking at increasing that, linked to the funding that Gillian mentioned in terms of spot purchasing, interim beds, and those conversations are ongoing. We're developing a plan around that to support us through the winter period and maximise the opportunity in that area. We've been working with third sector organisations where one of the key aspects in terms of the challenges in the hospital is supporting people when they're ready and well to go home to leave the hospital as early as possible to free up those beds to allow that flow in hospitals. People coming into the hospital requiring to be admitted can go to the right place at the right time. So we're working with third sector organisations, and we've just approved an approach with third sector organisations funded by our winter funding, and this will include having a coordinator, a link worker in the hospital, liaising with the hospital teams, so that as soon as somebody is ready to go home, they get that support to go home. That support can include helping with transportation, undertaking a home safety check, checking that the people have what they need to get by when they first come home. That might include food, for example, removing any obvious trip hazards, again, to reduce the risk that people might have other injuries, and arranging for collecting any prescriptions and doing safe and well calls as well. So we're really pleased about that approach, and we'll be able to give you an update on how that's progressing at the next IJB. We're working closely with Scottish Government as well around, again, just focusing on improving that flow and in-day capacity, reducing the length of stay through a shift to a planned date of discharge, and that involves the hospital leaders teams working really closely with our teams to make sure we get that very person-centred approach, making sure that as soon as somebody is clinically ready to go home, we've already thought about and put in place where we can the plans to allow them to go home as quickly as possible, or to a more appropriate place than being in an acute hospital, and that might involve a sideways move to an interim care bed, for example. In addition, we've put in place a new contract with a specialist provider that provides a reablement and discharge to assess, and that's really made a difference in terms of that flow out of hospital, supporting people to come home and be reabled while they're being assessed for care. So hopefully they can achieve their outcomes with the minimum input from a care at home perspective. So that's really having a big impact. We're really pleased with how that's going. We're also working very closely with our providers, with the support of Scottish Care, to look at where care is currently provided, making sure that we're working as efficiently as possible to provide the best possible care to people in their communities and maximise the care that we can provide. So that includes looking at where people are located in terms of where they need care, to minimise the travel time going from one house to another from our providers. That involves the providers discussing how they could potentially, how we could potentially share that care more effectively together, looking at potential for walking runs. So it's about using our available capacity to its maximum potential to make sure that we're providing as much of the appropriate care as we possibly can. We're also working on a project that we'll see, it's called single-handed care. Another way of thinking about that is prescribing proportionate care, and that's about training and use of equipment to make sure that our limited available resource for people to care can make the best possible impact across the communities and the people that need that care. We've also done, we're doing what we can to create that staff capacity. I've already mentioned a number of things. What we did do a couple of months ago was updating the COVID self-isolation process, and again that allows people to come back to the workplace at the earliest possible opportunity if they do have a close contact, for example. And again, that's made a difference in terms of the staff availability. We've also been working very closely with colleagues in NHS Forth Valley around bank healthcare support workers to support our care at home and care homes and care at home, sorry. So the healthcare support workers off the bank, they don't allow us to take ongoing additional care, but what they do is provide that capacity when our staff need to have a holiday, need to have a day off, or are unwell themselves, and make sure there's no gap in that care provision. That's really, really important for both the person receiving the care, but also in terms of the pressure on the staff, knowing that that's okay for them to have a day off and to recover because there's somebody that will continue to provide that care. So that's been really, really invaluable and really, really helpful. We're also progressing a range of internal recruitment, and I think, as Patricia mentioned earlier, really starting to understand those demands, looking at the emerging data. Our data systems are less developed than the hospital systems, so we're able to plan and utilise and focus on our recruitment in the right places for best effect. Volker Council also put out a notice calling for volunteers from council staff, and we've had a few people coming forward, and that's predominantly around helping out to provide early morning visits or after work visits to people who need care at home. And we also attended a Forth Valley Recruitment College event, which will support a number of placements for students in health and social care, all of which is really positive. So there's lots of really good work going on. The staff and colleagues are working above and beyond to really try and address this and minimise the impact, recognising that we are moving into winter. It's felt like winter since summer, but there's a huge amount of work ongoing. And we're really hopeful this will help to mitigate some of the challenges we're seeing at the moment and will continue to see. So the recommendation in the report is to ask Integration Joint Board to consider and comment on the current system pressures and the mitigating actions that have been and are being implemented, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gail. I'm sure there'll be a number of questions. I think, you know, at that point about everybody working above and beyond, you know, I know from my meetings with Gillian and Patricia what a huge amount of work everybody is doing, and our staff taking on more and more volunteering as well, you know, to try and help support people over this challenging period. I think I probably have a couple of questions, but I think I'll move on to Morven first.
Thank you. Yes, I was really pleased to note that you have a link worker from the third sector helping in the hospital, which I think will make an enormous difference. You'll be aware that the carer centre has a worker in the hospital as well, so I'd like to think that they are working together on this. I had a couple of specific questions. The first one was point 412. I am aware that you've contacted families and carers to see if you can rearrange packages so that you're focusing on those in most need, which obviously is the sensible approach. I don't actually understand what planning walking runs means, so that was one of my questions. And another one, again, is not understanding what it means, and it's point 4.15, time bandings. I don't understand what that means.
Kay, would you like me to come back and answer those? So in terms of walking runs, that's about looking at where the people are who need care at home. And sometimes what we might find is a provider's maybe providing care for somebody in one village and then having to move on to the next village. So if we look at that from a geographic perspective, and again, not all carers have access to transportation and cars. So if we can look at from a sort of a helicopter view in terms of where are the people that need care, is there a way of readjusting who's providing that care in order to minimise the travel time, which is wasted time people could be providing care during that time, and to enable people to, some carers to walk between the people they're providing care for. And again, that enables more people than would otherwise be able to provide care if people aren't able to drive or don't have that transport. So that's what I mean by walking runs. Apologies, that wasn't clearer in the report. In terms of the time banding, one of the things that we're looking at is whether or not we can put care at home packages into bandings as opposed to specific times. So there'll be particular criteria that mean that people have to have a visit at a certain time. They might have to have their medication, for example, at certain times of the day. However, if we can make that as open and variable as possible within those constraints in terms of what needs to happen at which times, we can then support the carer can be empowered to have the conversation with the person being cared for to make sure it's meeting their outcomes. And that also can sometimes allow for a greater number of packages of care, because if everybody has 9 o'clock, it's harder to manage than a slot between 8 and 10, for example. So that's what that means, and we're working through that. We haven't yet seen the outputs of that, but that's the thought behind that.
Thank you very much. Yes, that's helpful. I would just make the point in terms of time bandings that while I understand the sense of what you're doing here, I would hate to think we might move back to a situation where carers are there for 20 minutes and then disappear. You need somebody there for the appropriate length of time, let me put it that way. It's no good to carers if they've just got somebody who nips in and out and does very little. Not criticising the care support here, simply saying that's the reality if they are, and we know they're under pressure. We know they've got so many homes to visit, but just to be careful that people are getting the time that they require. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Marvin. This is from the perspective of when they can receive the care as opposed to how much care they need to get the right amount of care to meet their outcomes and their personal needs.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marvin. I'll just ask I suppose a quick question. First of all, to say that you feel really positive around the plans around helping people to support timely discharge and the assistance with things like safety checks and prescriptions and food and making sure the heating's working. Because if someone's been in for 2 or 3 weeks, it could have conked out by that point, or I suppose that everybody helping with that might need a chart of how different boilers work, but I think that's a really, really positive things and around the befriending and welfare checks. And I know that the food train is recruiting to and supporting in our area as well. So I think all of these type of services that really help people in their day-to-day life, I think, are fantastic. I had a question around staff well-being, and it kind of leads across the kind of 3 reports, including this one. 3.4 talks about staff and unpaid carer fatigue, and I know that there's been funding brought through around supporting staff well-being, and there's something about, I can see in my head a little bit about what well-being might look like in a hospital. So you might be able to set aside space, you might be able to make available food and things like that to enable people to have a bit of space. But I'm kind of struggling a little bit more in my head to say, what does that look like for our social care staff? And also, what does that look like for unpaid carers? Because I know that the fund is across the piece. So just if I'm just trying to figure out how that looks in terms of supporting people, whether they're paid or unpaid, providing care at home.
I can come in and answer that if you like, Councillor Cully. So I think it's you described that really well. So what is well-being for different groups of staff will depend on the group of staff, and the approach that we're taking is the staff know best what they would like in terms of that well-being. So we're asking the staff about what they would like in terms of that well-being support. So because they are the experts in them and what would make a difference. We discussed a proposal from GPs yesterday, for example, and we're very clear this needs to extend across all of our staff groups, and different staff groups will find important different supports in terms of their well-being.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions on this report? And it's very comprehensive. Thank you, Gail, for all the information on this. I know that this will be something that we will come back to. But thank you very much on that. Any more questions? None. In that case, obviously we'll prove that we've considered and commented on them. So I'll move on to our. What I'll do is we'll have this report and then we can have a short comfort break. So Gordon Mackenzie's coming is going to speak on the JLES proposed new service delivery model. Gordon, can I see him? I don't see him. He was here.
Thank you. I'm here. I was desperately trying to unmute myself there.
Okay, great, Gordon. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So members will hopefully be familiar with JLES, but just a brief recap. The Joint Loan Equipment Service provides equipment across Forth Valley. There's some local variation in the arrangements, but it's a service there that covers not just the Falkirk Health and Social Care Partnership area, it covers Claxon Stirling as well. It's funded by the two partnerships and NHS Forth Valley. For some time there's been a recognition that JLES needs to review and focus to meet the changing needs of the community going forward. The drivers for that are increasing numbers of frail people living at home for longer. We've seen something like a 48% increase in the number of beds being delivered in the past year. There's been quite a significant increase in the volume of activity for some time. We also want to increase the amount that we reuse and recycle of equipment. We want there to be geographical fairness and equity across Forth Valley. Changes in the way that we manage some conditions, more self-management, we've got to respond to that. And we want systems that are simple yet effective to use. There's some legacy systems in there that make it quite difficult for staff to order equipment and different systems that operate in different areas. So over the summer, we brought in an external consultant through the improvement service to look at the service and provide us with some options. The review underscored the conclusions that we can come to ourselves and set out 4 options for consideration, as you'll see at 4.2 in the paper. The preferred option, the unified option, looks at supporting and extending self-management, consolidating and enhancing buffer stores across Forth Valley to offer better access and responsiveness. It's hoped that it will, or believed it would enhance the ordering and tracking of equipment and offer procurement efficiencies as well as improving reuse and recycling. Paragraphs 4.3 and 4.4 in the report take you through how we looked at those options, and Table 5 shows the outcome of that assessment. If agreed by the board and our partners, the direction of travel would be to set up a short life working group to do more technical and financial work on this option, and obviously to consult with several users and carers as we develop that over the next few months. We need to do detailed financial work and technical work to ensure that the option that we put forward for funding is robust. The plan is to report to IGBs and NHS Forth Valley in April of next year. We've obviously got a difficult winter in front of us, hence the slightly longer timescale than we would want. But we set that as a target for ourselves, and we will bring back a paper with detailed costings and further detail on the technical considerations as well. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. I shall bring in Marvin and then Roger.
Thanks, Gordon. I think this is really positive here. I've worked with JLES for at least 20 years, and they've had over that time uncertainty about their future, and staff have all welcomed, staff on the ground, they've all welcomed this report, and hopefully it will lead to some sort of security for them and investment in the service for the future. So thank you. It's really a really great report.
Thank you, Roger.
And I'll bring in Marvin.
With respect, I was struggling to understand why it required an external consultant to look at JLES, because it has been evident for quite a few years now exactly what the problems were. First of all, it was that people didn't know how to access the service. They didn't know where the centre is, and this paper still doesn't say where this centre is, although I believe it's somewhere in Grange now. But an even bigger problem has been for some time that people didn't know how to return items. And I'm aware of a number of people who've had this problem, that they no longer required the equipment, and in some cases, sadly, the person who was using it has died, and it hasn't been returned because they don't know how to return it. There was a piece in the Falkirk Herald last week, which actually was quite informative, suggesting that because of an arrangement with the council, with that people could take these items to the recycling centres run by the council, which sounds like a really sensible idea. That isn't mentioned in this report. Is that the case, that people can go to recycling centres and hand over things that will be reused? Because there must have been a lot of waste over the years for things that have not come back and not been reused.
Pardon?
Thank you. We are looking, you're correct, we are looking to recycle more. One of the issues that we have, a very practical matter, is capacity to store equipment. So obviously we need to try and manage the getting equipment back, and the plan is that we will put out requests in the near future for certain items, rather than ask everybody to bring whatever they've got from the house all at one time, which I fear might overwhelm us. So yes, the plan is to recycle and to offer people different options as to how they recycle, rather than have to bring it back to the central stores in Grangemouth. We want to make it as accessible and easy as possible to recycle. We're also looking to, we already engaged a third sector organisation to help with the uplift of that, because our vans which are doing the delivering are absolutely flat out. So we're trying to manage different constraints, the capacity of the store, the availability of vans, but it is very much on our radar to improve the recycling, make it easier for people to bring equipment back or offer equipment to be uplifted. In relation to the external consultant, we did want somebody who was independent, I suppose, of the different funding partners to look at it, to look at the current arrangements, and to sense check the conclusions we'd come to. There are 3 different parties. We want to make sure that the options that we choose are right for all partners, and service users are absolutely at the centre of this. So that was the thinking, to get somebody in with a fresh pair of eyes to look at what we were what we were thinking and to help us to get to a conclusion.
Thank you very much. I'm certainly very encouraged by what you say about the recycling aspect, which sounds excellent.
Thank you, Morven. I think Patricia would like to come in.
Thank you. Just to add to Gordon's response, we have always recycled pieces of equipment and have specialist facilities for decontaminating. Not all pieces of equipment lend themselves to recycling, but we always have. But I hear what you're saying, Morven, that it's not been well known and not been easily accessed. And it's one of the performance indicators that we'll be looking at in terms of the responsiveness, not only on the distribution, but also on the collection. It is a really complex service, providing over quite a wide geographical area with just 2 vans at the moment. So we need to look at the logistics around that. We got external consultants for the reason that Gordon explained, but also because it was a priority, and it's actually been on the stocks for us as part of the IGB's plan for nearly 3 years, and we just wanted to make sure we could accelerate that with the current levels of staff absence and other demands, so that the consultant helped with a particular element of the work, but then allowed representatives from the 4 partners to get round the table and do that options appraisal, which was subsequent to the consultant's work. So hopefully that gives you a level of reassurance on those matters. Thanks.
Thank you.
Gordon, you'd like to come in.
Thanks. Yeah, hi Gordon. I think it's interesting. I think what instinctively seemed to be the best solution is the one that comes at the end of a structured options appraisal. So that's always quite nice. I'm very happy to support the recommendation. I wonder a bit just in terms of timescale, if we're talking about reports coming back in April, kind of when it's anticipated that the new service would be up and running, and just following on from Patricia's points in terms of key performance indicators and the type, what would the process be when the new service is up and running to evaluate, to monitor? It would be good to come back a year after and say, the benefits we thought would accrue have accrued or haven't accrued, and this is what we need to do.
Thank you, Gordon. Yeah, I think very good points made. I would agree entirely with what you're saying there. We, as part of the technical and financial modelling that we're going to be doing, we do need to build in that review at a year at least, and make sure that we are achieving those benefits, and if not, why not? In terms of the timing, I think there'll be different parts of the review. I don't want to commit myself to specific dates, but I think there'll be different parts, elements of it, which could come in more quickly than others. So, for example, if we're talking about additional staff in vans, that can come relatively quickly. But in terms of the IT systems to support the ordering and the tracking of equipment, which will help to drive that improvements, both in terms of logistics, but also the recycling, that would potentially take quite a bit longer to purchase and embed those. We do have a relatively new system, which we hopefully will be able to develop to provide a lot of that functionality, but there are elements in there that may take a bit longer.
Thank you, Gordon. Morven, did you want to come back in again? That was a legacy hand. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that report. I think we all really look forward to seeing this as the next report, because I think it is a hugely important service for enabling people to be supported at home and to live in their own homes for as long as possible. I did have the pleasure of going down and visiting the service actually not long after I was elected, and there's a huge amount of work, but actually with what is a relatively limited staff group for such an important service. So I really look forward to seeing this as it develops. So if there's no further questions, so I just double check what my recommendation. So our recommendation was just to consider the conclusions, and we'll get a further report. I just want to double check that is everyone in agreement that option 4 is the option to be progressed further? There's not any disagreement with that. I'll just double check that. Okay, and in that case, what I'm going to do is we'll have I think a 10-minute break. So if everyone can be back for 11. I can't read a clock, honestly. I'll give everyone a chance to stretch their legs and grab a cup of coffee. Okay, thank you. But I know that Margaret is back, who's going to be presenting the report. So I think we've got recording started again. So in that case, I would like to ask Margaret Petherbridge to speak to the report on the Care Strategy Progress Report. Margaret.
Thanks, Fiona. And just I'm having to switch between 2 screens, so apologies, and please just bear with me in relation to that. So the report you've got in front of you is to outline the progress of the work in relation to the carer strategy, but obviously taking into account the impact of working over the last 18 months or so in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. We've provided as much performance information as we possibly can, including the activity from the completion of adult care support plans and young carer statements for Q1 and Q2 of 2021 to 22. And just by way of a bit of context to this, you know, as we've been working throughout this last year and a half, we've absolutely recognised the extreme difficulty that carers have faced in relation to how things have changed as a result of COVID-19. Many of them have had to really increase their carer role, and a lot of services that were available to people prior to the pandemic either became very reduced or actually not available at all. People were taking on carers roles for the first time because of their particular circumstances and the difficulty with accessing services. The anxiety that exposure or potential exposure to COVID caused among carers and the people they cared for was absolutely apparent, and we were, along with our partners, were trying to really support people through that. The difficulty accessing respite was at the top of the list, that, you know, services that people, whether it was through day service or support at home or support within care homes or holiday type breaks, etc., that all really reduced or disappeared overnight. And even where people were able to access it, the process for doing that included COVID testing and potentially self-isolation within their rooms when they accessed respite, all of that really took its toll. And we know now that some of the service provision that we had before COVID is not going to return. Some providers will not be offering respite, for instance, when things start to go back to normal. There's also been financial impact on carers and the people they care for, and sometimes that's been as a result of changes in work for people as well. So that has its own anxieties. So we've been trying to make sure that we monitor and manage the communication around all of this, to try and make sure that we could understand as far as possible what carers needed from us by way of support. And that included things like vaccination support and access to things like PPE. So the carers strategy update, one of the things that we're asking for is whether or not we could extend the review of the strategy for a further 12 months, subject to agreement by partners. This was extended last year, and the reason for that being that, you know, we couldn't fully understand exactly what was going to be required, and we needed to fully include carers in that engagement to understand what direction they wanted the strategy to go in. And we also wanted to make sure that we understood really what services might look like, or what support might look like for carers. And one of the things that we discovered through COVID was that although a lot of things went online, that's not always the best way to communicate with people. And so we've had to look at really how do we communicate better with people. We've updated the contact details that we've got with carers very recently, just updating telephone numbers, making sure addresses are correct, but also email contacts, etc., to try and make sure that we've got the most effective way of getting in touch with carers, and that how we do that is actually in line with what their preferred method of communication would be. All of this has been done working alongside our partners right across the board, and particularly the Carer Centre and other third sector organisations that have been supporting us with this. Throughout the pandemic, we have offered a really flexible approach to respite, where the usual respite processes were not available for people. So we went out to carers and we asked them what would make a difference to you, and we found that a lot of carers are very much focused on the needs of the person that they are caring for, and so we had to do some work with carers to get them to kind of focus on their own needs and what that support might look like from their perspective, what would help them in terms of their health and well-being, and that was a big part of what we were doing. And we've continued that approach as things are still quite restricted just now in terms of access to things like respite, to try and get carers to focus really on what is important to them. So we've also continued to fund the Carers Fund projects, and we've had good feedback from them in terms of, for instance, the adult care support plans and young carer statements that are carried out by the Carer Centre. The short breaks implementation, which included that flexible respite, but that works in tandem with some funding that sits with the Carer Centre as well, about offering short breaks, whatever that might look like to carers. Falkirk Citizens Advice Bureau have been working on maximising income for carers, and they've done a significant amount of work in relation to that. And I know that, as I've said before, carers' finances are often or have been disrupted to some extent by the pandemic, and Falkirk Cab have been able to help with that. And in one situation that they fed back to us, they were able to increase income of £28,000 for one family, which is a significant amount. Falkirk District Association for Mental Health, Family and Carer Support have identified a number of carers that were unknown to them, and have provided a really flexible way of supporting carers through telephone support, online support, and more recently face-to-face. So they've had some really good feedback from carers about looking after their mental health, or the mental health of the person they care for. More recently, the Carer Centre has been recruiting 2 telephone support workers, and that is about trying to make sure that carers that are already known to the Carer Centre are contacted on a regular basis, and that we make sure that they can have their carer support plans or young carer statements updated, and that they get that ongoing support. And they've also recruited a digital worker to look at how they can maximise the communication and digital access for carers in terms of what the Carer Centre is able to offer. The carer strategy itself, as I say, we would be due to review that and publish it again by the end of March or beginning of April in 2022. We have checked this out with the Scottish Government policy team, and that review can consist of us agreeing not to change it at this stage, as long as we engage with our partners around that decision. And we've already been in touch with our Children and Families colleagues, who have agreed that they would support an extension, and we've also heard from our NHS contact that would also be supported. The Carers Forum will discuss this next week, and that's actually the main decision that we'll be looking for, is whether or not carers would like a bit more time to consider what the strategy should look like going forward as we emerge from the pandemic, and that we can fully engage with carers, not just online, but in a lot of different ways, and give as much access to carers as we can, so that we can review and update that strategy in an appropriate way. We've also been asked to produce by the Scottish Government, and chief officers have agreed to this, to produce a statement of intent for unpaid carers, and that is in development just now. We've been working on workforce development issues in terms of updating staff's information and knowledge about referring carers, about carer support and adult carer support plans and young carer statements. During 2021, new regulations come in terms of the provision of adult care support plans, young carer statements for carers of people who have been diagnosed with a terminal illness. And we've developed with our workforce development manager a 7-minute briefing that is going to be rolled out, and that has already started to be rolled out, to make sure that staff are aware of what their responsibilities are in relation to the fast tracking of those carer support plans and statements. We continue to refresh people on self-directed support and short breaks. We're aware that there's been a lot of new staff come on board, and we're in contact with the teams to go along to team meetings and try and make sure that we can fully refresh staff. We've also been working in partnership with STS Forth Valley, who are supporting us in those training sessions, and they're conducting a pilot project with central locality that will offer proactive support to people waiting for assessment. People will, while they're waiting for their assessment, they'll be given information about self-directed support that will help them to be fully involved in their assessment, but also STS Forth Valley will look at whether or not community support might be appropriate for some of the supports that the individual or their carer might need while they're still waiting for that assessment. The carer census, the submission for 2019 and 2021 had been suspended due to the pandemic. That's now that will now be part of the performance information report that you get. There was a reduction in adult care support plans due to the impact of the pandemic for last year, but in this year we can see the numbers increasing again, and that reflects the fact that the Care Centre have identified that there are more carers known to them than previously. In terms of hospital discharge, we will be working again with NHS Forth Valley around the planning of discharge, to support unpaid carers to be involved in that process. There have been a few staff changes, and obviously discharge planning was impacted by COVID-19 as well. But we've been reviewing the membership of the Care Strategy Implementation Group, and we want to try and make sure we've identified an NHS representative now, and we want to try and make sure that we take that part of the carers strategy forward in the most effective way. So in summary, from all of that, there are just a couple of things from the report that we're asking for, and one is just to note the progress made to date, including that we're trying to be really flexible with the support that we offer to carers, and also subject to agreement by the final partner, which is carers themselves and the Care Centre, that we could extend the carer strategy for a further year to give us the time and the opportunity to do some in-depth work with carers to find out from them what they want that strategy to look like going forward.
Thank you very much, Margaret. I obviously you know have a very keen interest in this, and the work that has been developed over this period, very significant. I probably have a couple of questions, but I think I'd like to bring Morven in first, and for comment and questions.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Yeah, it's a very detailed report. There's a lot of good information there. I've got to be honest and say, when I first saw it on the agenda that there was a proposal to delay the review, I was a little bit alarmed. Having read your report, and being aware of the continued support that's being given, not just to the Carers Centre, but to other third sector organisations. It's clear that the carers are still very much in the mind of the partnership. And I know we're not the only partnership who have proposed that the review be delayed. I think the reasons you've given in here are perfectly adequate. So personally, it's something that I feel comfortable with. As Margaret mentioned, there's a carers forum next week, and the carers have already been made aware of this proposal and being asked to comment on it. So we'll get their views next week when the forum takes place. But in the meantime, thank you very much for the report, Margaret.
Thank you, Morven. Is there any other comments? Just seeing if there's any hands. Well, in that case, I've probably got a couple of questions. Margaret, I was really pleased to see the connection around the CAB. Obviously, I'm aware of both the DAM and the Carer Centre do work in terms of income maximisation, but obviously the challenges around finances are very significant for a lot of people now, but particularly around caring with things like furlough ending and what the implications of that are, and issues around the challenges around heating would be one that'd be quite significant. I suppose my question was around the connection with the wider council supports in terms of the Scottish Welfare Fund, anything around vouchers for heating and things like that, some of those wider programmes and the connections around that. And I had a second question around the hospital discharge process and about how that will fit in with potential issues around potential I'm going to use interim care placements because I can't think of a better way to describe them, where people aren't where people are clinically ready to come home, but there's still awaiting a package, and just how the Carer Centre and that process will connect with that.
In terms, excuse me, in terms of the finance issues, then we and the Carer Centre would be working really closely with CAB to make sure that any links are made into things like the Scottish Welfare Fund, and to try and make sure that carers are first of all aware that the financial advice and support is available, and secondly are given the support to make sure that they access as much of that support as they would be entitled to and would want. So that those are ongoing processes in terms of, and there have been other things like, as you know, the Scottish Government have provided additional funding to carers as well to try and support them with some of the financial issues that they might face as a result of that. And part of the communication through the Carer Centre, etc., is to try and make sure that people are aware of what's available. And again, I know the Carer Centre has worked really hard at trying to make sure they've got really up-to-date contact information with carers, as we have within short breaks, to try and make sure that we get as much cover as we possibly can. And that people don't miss out on potential support, whether it's financial or otherwise. So hopefully, does that answer your question, Fiona? The other thing about hospital discharge, as we all know, this has been really, really difficult. It's been very difficult because of the position that our care homes and our carers have been in relation to the impact of COVID, the potential for exposure to COVID, whether people are coming out of hospital, going home, or going into an interim setting. And some of that has had a knock-on effect on things like respite as well. So in terms of how we support people within discharge, I think it's really important that we now really start to focus, as we're emerging from COVID, on what discharge needs to look like in terms of involving carers in that, and trying to make sure that the carers' voice comes through that. I know we've been working with the link workers in the 2 hospitals, and to some extent at one point they felt that the referrals were kind of dropping off a bit in relation to hospital discharge, and we completely understand some of the reasons for that. We know that staff within the hospitals and teams are absolutely, you know, running to stand still at times in relation to that. So our focus will be on trying to make sure that those links, you know, every time we hear something like that, we will get in touch with the hospital social work team, we'll get in touch with discharge teams, but every time we hear something like that, our focus is trying to make sure that staff are fully aware that there's that additional support there, because it is additional support to try and make sure that carers have the support and the information that they need to be able to pick up their caring role again, and that, you know, the support packages that are put in place are put in place with carers in mind. So we know we've got a lot of work to do in relation to that. We're very aware of that, and we are, as we'd said in the report, we've been reviewing the membership of the strategy implementation group, and one of the main focuses in terms of moving forward will be on how we can make hospital discharge better for carers.
That's great, thank you very much, Margaret. Patricia, you would like to come in?
Yeah, it was just to build on and comment what Margaret was saying. So one of the pieces of work that we're working on at the moment is to develop a fully integrated discharge hub, which would be pan Forth Valley. So I think it'd be really key that those carers, like support workers, are linked into that, and you know, I'll ask Gail to ensure that that does happen. The other thing, Margaret, is around the planned date of discharge, so moving away from an estimated date of discharge to a planned date of discharge, so that conversation with carers and the family and the patient is happening on admission, so that everyone is clear about what that pathway will be for that individual, and that planning starts then for the discharge to anticipate what the needs would be to support the patient, but also the carer on that discharge process. So I think it's really key that the carers link workers are linked into both those elements of work, and I'm sure Gail will pick that up as our rep on Silver Command, but also involved in those discussions with colleagues in NHS Forth Valley. I think if we get those bits right, that will really improve that planning and that experience that people have of their discharge process. Thanks.
Thank you, Patricia. Do we have any further comments or questions?
Just in relation to what Patricia said, that is really helpful, and it's something that, you know, we'll fully engage with the Carer Centre. And one of the things that we have highlighted, we were having discharge planning meetings, etc., with NHS prior to COVID hitting, and Stirling and Clacks were included in that as well, because obviously Forth Valley Hospital crosses over those areas. And one of the areas that we really wanted to make sure we focus on as well, and I know that the support workers within the hospital are very aware of this, is that young carers are identified as well, because they hold a lot of information often about adults that are in hospital. And sometimes that can be a bit overlooked, and young carers feel as though because of their age they're maybe not included in the way that they could. So I know the Care Centre has done a significant amount of work around that, and around supporting young carers, and making sure that hospital staff are aware of the impact of the care that young carers provide, and also the information they have and the consideration for them when discharges are happening.
Thank you very much, Margaret. I think that's a really useful discussion around discharge and making sure everyone's involved. In that case, I'll just check again. Any other further questions or comments? So we'll bring together a project team to discuss that. That's great. Thank you very much. In that case, are we happy to agree the recommendation to extend the strategy for a further year, subject to partners' agreement? So that's a Carers Forum agreement. No, yeah, thank you very much. Okay, and I can now move on to item 11, the Home Support and Supported Living Contract, and Ian Henderson is going to speak to that.
Thank you, Councillor Colley. Yes, my name's Ian Henderson. I'm the Council's Legal and Procurement Manager. I'm also accompanied today by my colleague James King, who's one of the procurement coordinators in the Corporate Procurement Unit. So, as you mentioned, Councillor Colley, this report relates to the Home Support and Supported Living contract. And I think everyone on the meeting will be aware that the current contract is due to expire at the end of March next year. I think we all also recognise that this contract is absolutely critical for users, for our communities, and also very significant in terms of its estimated value, which you will see in the report is noted to be in the region of £30 million per annum. So very significant sums involved indeed. The report provides an update on where things are sitting on progress generally, and also I think critically the mitigation plan to cover the gap between the 31st of March 2022 and the revised target of the end of September 2022 for a new contract to be put in place. Originally, the timetable that was prepared was targeting the new contract being in place on the 1st of April 2022, which would provide a seamless overnight transition from the previous contract to the new contract. That was agreed fairly recently by the board to be adjusted to the end of September. And just listening to Margaret there, I think similar considerations were taken into account in taking that decision. And it's principally pressures on all parties caused by the pandemic. And as we've noted, the almost unprecedented increases in demand and pressure across the whole system. I suppose you've been listening to a lot of comments like that during the course of the morning. So a revised timetable is shown at section 5 of the report, and I think looking at it, it's fairly apparent that it remains very challenging. And you'll note that consultation, strategy development and contract documentation is to be completed by the end of February 2022, which given Christmas gaps, etc., is not that far off. Section 4 notes the good progress that had been made to date by the user intelligence group that had been established. And in discussion recently, particularly with Patricia and Gillian, that's been refocused in light of the restructuring of the procurement and commissioning teams within the council. So section 6 notes that work has been carried out to establish that the current contract can be extended to cover the gap between the 1st of April and the end of September 2022. And this is principally possible because of the flexibility available under the 2015 regulations, because it's under the light touch regime for social care procurement. And I think looking at matters logically and sensibly, the reasons for using this flexibility come back to the pandemic and the serious demands that have been made of all parties over the last period. So I think in conclusion, work's progressing. A refocused user intelligence group will be taking the project forward. And we've noted at the recommendations at recommendation 2.4 that a further report will be submitted to a future meeting of the board to agree the finalised contract strategy. So thanks, Councillor Colley, and happy, along with James, to answer any questions that anyone might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. I'm just going to open it up to any questions or comments. No, yeah. Yourself and James. Oh, wait a minute. There's Cecil, and I'll bring Cecil in, and then Patricia.
Apologies, just a wee bit slow at the system today, and the hands going up. Apologies for that, though. Just to say, I think it's actually been a very good process. I think it's been very open and transparent. It's allowed people to have an understanding of the complexity of the process, and what I do hope is that we get a good outcome from that. But I just think just having an understanding of what's been involved for everyone, and having an influence as well, I think, on the weightings of the contract has been really helpful, and I'm sure that that's perhaps some lessons for the future.
Thank you, Cecil. And I'll bring in Patricia.
Thank you, convener. It was just really to add to Ian's comments with the report that this is, and I won't need to remind members of the board, given our previous papers and the demand that we are seeing for care at home, that this is a really critical piece of work for the partnership and for the board. And there's risk involved in this, that we really need to deliver. This extended timeline is still a very challenging timeline for us to deliver the quality of the contract that we want, but to be able to incorporate some of our learning from the pandemic, but also some of our ambition around how we manage and respond to individuals' needs in a way that is flexible and responsive. So Ian, Gillian, James, myself had a really helpful meeting earlier this week, where I think we're clear where there are some areas that we would like to see this developing, and we'll bring that back to the board in due course. But it is a significant piece of work for all of us, and it's not without risk that, you know, we really need to deliver it, and we need to deliver it within that time frame. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Patricia. In that case, are we happy to agree the recommendations, and we'll receive a further report in due course? Agreed. Thank you very much. Right, we're moving on to item 12, which is the HSCP annual performance report, and I believe that's Suzanne.
Thanks. Patricia, do you want to go first?
Yeah, if I could, it was just to make some comments for members of the board. This is our annual performance report, which you'll be used to receiving, and it covers the period from April 2020 to the end of March 2021. So the period of the pandemic. So it gives you a good overview of our performance in all areas, but it also provides you with the information related to our outcomes, our strategic outcomes, but also it's augmented with some case studies which hopefully give you a snapshot of the impact of some of the work and also the range and quality of the work. And just really to commend Suzanne, Callum and all of our colleagues and Suzanne's team for bringing this report together when at the same time we're drawing and making additional demand right across our teams. So really want to commend this to the board, and I'll hand over to Suzanne to give a more detailed overview. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia. And much of what I was actually going to say you've sort of covered, but just to recap, the annual performance report is presented to you today to approve for publication. And as Patricia's saying, it has covered the first year of the pandemic and our collective response. And in producing the report, we very much aimed to represent, or try to represent well, the work of our teams, our third and independent sector colleagues, our communities and our partners who were doing a tremendous amount of work in supporting people who needed our services and their carers. So Patricia says the report outlines many examples of the work that's been done and continues to be done over the year. And I hope this gives the board a much sort of fuller overview of the sort of activity that's happened. And similarly to Patricia, I'd like to acknowledge the contribution of many colleagues who provided examples to include in the report. And this was at a time of many sort of competing demands on them in terms of service delivery. So we hope we've represented their work well over the period. So in terms of the requirements around the annual performance report, you'll be familiar with the need to produce that, and that's sort of set out in section 3 of the report. The annual performance report itself reports on performance against the 9 national health and wellbeing outcomes, as well as our strategic plan priorities.
And on page 11 of the annual performance report, and that's actually page 11 of your packs of papers, we've illustrated the linkages between the national health and wellbeing outcomes and our strategic plan priorities, just to give you that sort of visual overview of the connections between them. The report then goes on to provide examples and updates against each of those 9 outcomes, and those include updates on our support for people team, which was the sort of council response to the pandemic and was established very early on with significant input from HSCP's colleagues around that. We've included multiple sort of information throughout the plan around our mental health and wellbeing work and mental health improvement resources that were promoted widely. The work of our community link workers and connecting with the communities as well is noted, as well as health promotion work, our work with primary care, and the day opportunities activities and how they've had to redesign and respond to the pandemic in different ways. And in addition to the paper you've just heard from Margaret, we've also noted some information around the support to carers. In terms of the data, we're required to report progress against the suite of 23 national indicators. I can't say that, sorry. And page 84 or 87 of the annual performance report, which again is 175, 179 of your papers, sets out our performance against these indicators. So the summary shows that 13 out of 19 of those indicators for which data is available. For Falkirk, we're comparing either well or similar to the national average. And Callum has included those data points in his performance monitoring report, which is next on the agenda, and he can give you sort of further information on that as you might need it. In relation to our local indicators, the partnerships reported good progress in areas such as completion of our anticipatory care plans, quite a significant increase over that period from just over 12,500 to 32,000 completed. Similarly, our key information summaries, that percentage increased from 7.8% to 10.4%. And those are significant areas about how we worked and supported people in terms of identification of needs for them. We've also made improvement around the measure that supports the proportion of people in the last 6 months of life spent at home. And that's moved from 8 to 6%, and that was an indicator of pre-integration, but it's moved up significantly to 89.4%. And there's also been improvements around our 3-week referral to treatment target for access to substance use services, and that increased from just under 96% to 97%. Delayed discharge, OT pending, access to psychological therapy services against their 18-week referral to treatment time remained areas of challenge, and these are sort of items we also cover regularly in the performance monitoring report, as well as associated actions that have been taken to address those priorities. So again, that can follow. So in conclusion, the annual performance report, it's our opportunity to celebrate, hopefully, and reflect the varied activities and improvements that have taken place and been achieved over the pandemic and the last reporting year. The reports will be presented to Falkirk Council and our NHS boards. We do that annually after it's been approved by the board, and we'll also circulate that more widely amongst our partners and colleagues for information, as well as the opportunities to promote aspects of that through social media, which this is the first year we've been in. We've had the post, our comms post, to be able to enable that to happen. So the board is asked to approve the publication of the report as noted at 2.1. I'm happy to take any questions on the report, and hopefully with colleagues' support if there are any specific questions around the services or the details of the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I think this report is excellent. It's so well presented and so easy to read, and bringing out those examples of the difference services staff have made to people in our community, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. I'm really be positive about how we can share those stories and those successes through social media and other mechanisms. I think we can see where the areas of challenge are, but I think you know, we've probably talked quite a lot about that across today, but I think that it's a real opportunity to really celebrate health and the work of the HSCP, the work of staff, the work of unpaid carers and people in our communities. So thank you very much for putting that together so well. And I'll open it up to questions. So I've got Gordon first, and then I'll bring Margot in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Suzanne. Yeah, I mean, it is a really good report. Performance reporting can sometimes seem rather dry with so much data in it, but I'd very much agree with what you and Patricia have said, that the case studies really help to bring that out and to show what it means for people, which is to a lot of folk far more important than those data points, even if they are showing good directions of travel and the like. I think in terms of dissemination, I wondered whether, I think I mentioned this to you, Suzanne, I wonder whether it'd be possible to do some sort of summary version. So I'm aware that it's 90 pages long, and it has to be 90 pages long because there's so many things it has to cover. But, you know, lots of people won't read a 90-page report. So I wonder if there could be some sort of kind of highlight report or something that might be a bit easier to circulate and to draw people's attention to.
No, thank you, Gordon, and thanks for the comments that you provided separately on the report. No, absolutely. I think the intention has been, and we've got a draft summary document. I think with other priorities and in supporting other activities with our colleagues, it's just been a little bit difficult to get that over the line. But yes, absolutely intend to do it. I think it is, like you say, it's what do you not include sometimes in these reports, and I think that's why it sometimes is the length it is. But I think I certainly find it, and colleagues find it useful throughout the year to pull on and reference for lots of different other sort of activities and support, and like I say, to recognise the contribution of many services across the partnership. But yes, quick answer to your question, we will produce a summary document.
Thank you very much. So can I bring in Margot now?
Right, it's really just to commend the report, and while understanding the need to perhaps have an executive summary in some way, I think the value of what's presented is so rich, and I feel it just presents the range, and I'm really concentrating on the earlier part, which applies more to patient care. I think the case studies are brilliant and quite diverse. I think the examples given throughout, from Smile for Life, etc., to other examples, really bring to life the points that are being made. It's been a tremendous amount of work, I think, for Suzanne, but I think it's really one of the best reviews I think I've ever seen, and very meaningful, particularly because it does highlight the range of work that's going on, the commitment of staff, and in my perspective, to the volunteers, that the examples it gives of ways in which many of the issues like discharge without care packages being possible to put in place right away, the work that's going on, and the transport which is being provided by volunteers, I would really thoroughly commend A, the work, and B, the content, and of course from my perspective the place it gives to the tremendous volunteers that you have.
Thank you, Margot, and I'll make sure this has been a team effort to produce, so I'll make sure the comments are passed on to the team. Thank you.
Suzanne. Roger, you'd like to come in?
Thanks, Fiona. I'm just got, I don't know how to express this, but just got a little bit of concern about the report, and that we all have to put our hands up, and we could have done things differently with hindsight in an extreme circumstance, and we haven't always got things right. I can certainly put my hands up, and it's been that was an incredibly difficult year. For my part, I've been glad that not too many of my service users that I work with have died, as brutal as that. And I felt the report maybe could have had a bit about what we've learned, and that we haven't, this is learning from what was completely unexpected circumstance. So I just felt some people reading that, having worked through this last year and a half and struggled, and I'm sure every one of us has struggled, to reflect a bit of that. I felt for some people on the ground here might have been helpful for them. Maybe this is the wrong place, I'm not sure.
I think that's a fair point around balance, and I think sometimes that's also about pace and the time to be able to step back and reflect on some of that. So that's a fair point, Roger, for us to think about. Maybe don't necessarily have an answer to how we do that just now, but I think we can have a think about that.
Yeah, I think the point about what we've learned, I think is important. I think it's how's that expressed, and where does that fit in with the performance report? Does it sit somewhere else? But where do we find the opportunities to talk about that and to talk about that more widely? And I don't know whether Patricia, this might be something we can take back and have a think about beyond the performance report, but perhaps with Michelle when we meet.
Yeah, if I can come in, I think that is, as you know, we've brought lessons learned reports to the Igb and to council, but that was really probably over a year ago, after that intensive period that we had at the start of the pandemic. We were very quick to do systematic debriefs with our teams. So actually I'm quite thoughtful, Roger, thank you for highlighting that perhaps it actually merits a separate report in terms of that, bringing together all of those lessons learned across the broader Kirk in terms of the carers, our voluntary sector, our staff, and those who've experienced our services during this time. So thank you. I welcome that discussion, Fiona.
We'll take that back as an action to look at, and thank you, Roger. I don't know if anyone else has any further comments, and on that basis that we'll kind of we'll have a look at that a further piece of work around lessons learned and how we talk about that and how we bring that forward. Are we happy to approve the publication of this, the performance report for this year? Need some nodding heads. Thank you very much. Okay, more performance. We're on to the regular performance monitoring report, and I believe Callum is going to present this one.
Thank you, Chair. The Performance Monitoring Report presents the Board with a summary of performance up to September 21 and provides a year-on-year comparison with an indication on direction of travel. As Suzanne mentioned, this iteration of the report also includes a summary of the National Core Suite of Integration Indicators, which are also included in the Annual Performance Report. Firstly, to look at our local performance indicators, which cover sections 1 to 3 in the main report. There is a focus on exception reporting, and I'm now going to take you through some of the key areas highlighted in section 1 of the report. The report highlights there are continued pressures around ED 4-hour compliance and delayed discharge, and section 3 also provides further details on some of the actions ongoing to support these areas. There were 55% more adult protection referrals in the first half of 21-22 compared to the same period last year, and that includes a notable increase in referrals relating to self-harm and neglect. And just for assurance, the Adult Protection Committee continues to oversee and monitor activity in this area. The report highlights the number of complaints received across both health and social work, as well as the percentage of complaints responded to within timescales, but also there are details in there on some of the themes of the complaints. For social work adult services, 73% of complaints in the first half of 21-22 were responded to within timescales, and for NHS services associated with the partnership, the equivalent figure was 78%. The report details the latest position across the partnership for attendance management, as well as waiting times for psychological therapies. And the report also outlines that there has been a 35% increase in the number of overdue pending occupational therapy assessments since the previous quarter. The report also provides some further background to this, as well as some details on a review of occupational therapy service provision across the partnership, which aims to reduce this number. Section 4 provides an annual summary of the core suite of integration indicators for performance in year 2021. These indicators are produced by Public Health Scotland on behalf of Scottish Government, and as Susanne has mentioned, they appear in our annual performance report. The national indicators are important as they allow us to get to have an outward look and to benchmark ourselves against others. In previous years, when looking at these indicators, the report would have had a focus on direction of travel. However, there's been a couple of changes in definitions and indicators, plus the impact of COVID on the data, and therefore the main focus for the analysis has been a comparison against the national average. So we built in tolerances where if the Falkirk rate is within 2% of national average, we've declared that as being similar, and anything out with that, we're categorising either as better or worse depending on direction. So figure 4.1 shows an at-a-glance summary of each of the indicators. So for 13 of 19 indicators, which equates to 68%, we're either comparing well or are similar to the national average. So areas of strength includes indicator 5, where 84% of adults receiving care rated it as excellent or good, and also indicator 17, where 87% of care services were graded good or better in inspections. More challenging areas include known pressure points, such as the unscheduled care indicators like 12 and 13, which are on emergency admissions and bed days, and also indicator 19 on delayed discharges. The board is asked to consider and comment on the content of the performance monitoring report, and I'm also happy to open up to any questions. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I'm shuffling my papers there. Thank you very much, Callum. Could I see if there's any questions or comments from anyone? I suppose I have one question. If there's trying to get to the right page, I think it's really helpful to have the sort of summary of where we're sitting similar and where we're sitting better and where we're sitting lower. And I think, you know, that I suppose it's trying to, I suppose for myself, wondering the investment that's come through around winter planning and what sort of impact that will start to have will we start to see an impact. But the one that kind of jumped out at me was around the rate of admissions and that unscheduled care really sitting quite well, it appears to sit quite high compared to the rest of Scotland. And I suppose I'm trying to think what my question is in there about how we maybe particularly look at particular target areas and say that this is what we're doing over the piece and what the impact is. I know that we do that to some extent, but sort of focus pieces of work, and maybe Patricia can help me express that a little bit better.
I mean, Andrew might want to come in here, but across the two partnerships and the health boards, we're working with colleagues in Scottish Government at the moment to do quite a focused piece of work around unscheduled care, and that includes the work we've referred to earlier about planned date of discharge, the integrated discharge hub, but also a lot of work going on in the wards, focused work going on in the wards around ward rounds, planning for discharge, a bit of support and challenge around decisions about discharge, who's doing the assessments, about care, because as you know, historically we've had huge levels of people being discharged with 4 times a day packages of care, which are more difficult to source. So it's about that multidisciplinary team approach to that, to the assessment and to the planning. I don't know if Andrew wants to come in. He's the executive lead in Forth Valley for unscheduled care, and Andrew, myself and the other chief officer from Clacton Stirling co-chair the Unscheduled Care Programme Board, which has just been re-established. I don't know, Andrew, if Andrew's still here, if he wants to come in on that.
I think he left a message to say he had to go to another meeting, Patricia.
Oh, sorry, I hadn't picked that up. But certainly there's a number of strands of that work that we're getting some external support from Scottish Government at the moment that is expected to drive some improvement out of these key areas.
Thank you, Patricia, that's very helpful. Can I see if anyone else has any further comments, questions? No? Okay, so are we happy to approve the recommendations, to note the content and the appropriate management actions? Yes, thank you very much. Okay, final item is the Igb Programme of meetings. Suzanne, as ever, well done for for managing to get a programme of meetings within all the other meetings that are in the schedule already. So I don't know if you just want to say a few words.
Well, it doesn't seem like a year since I brought this paper, a similar paper to you for 2021, and here we are talking about 2022. And sometimes it's a little bit of elbows out just to get the dates in the diary first. But yes, so the report proposes a timetable of meetings for the board over 2022, and that includes the board development sessions as well, and that's for your consideration and comment. We've also included a draft forward planner just as a starter to sort of think about the sort of business over the years, and obviously that will be augmented as we go, as things come in or as other things need to be added to that. We've also, just so that the board has an overview of all its business and business meetings, we've included some indicative dates for the Clinical Care Governance Committee and Audit Committee, and they're subject to approval at their upcoming meetings, so that we can amend that once that's sort of been finalised. So, like I say, it's proposed in the paper that we would continue to meet remotely, and we would review that over the year as we go around those arrangements. So in summary, the board's just asked to approve the proposed meeting dates set out in the paper at 2.1. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Any comments or questions around the meeting dates or the forward planner? Okay, well in that case, we're happy to agree the proposed timetable. Great, thank you very much. Well, that brings our meeting to a close. So thank you everyone for your time today, and I hope the rest of your day is a good day and hopefully not too busy, but I know for some of you that's just a vain hope. But I'll hope it anyway for you. So thank you very much.